For all the country's progress, barriers to social justice and economic equity exist in far too many corners of this society. Too many of our fellow brothers and sisters have died, sacrificed, and suffered at the illness that is racism. The 100 Black Men of Syracuse decided it's time for us to step out differently. How can we further the conversation to re-examine and create a more empathetic and inclusive society, one conversation at a time?
I was surrounded by public servants as a kid. My dad served on the city council, eventually ended up in Congress. His father also served in Congress and served as mayor. But even outside of politics, I had my mother was a teacher. My aunts and uncles were in social work, were lawyers, hospital administrators. But the common theme was service. It was doing good. It was helping people. And I couldn't help but to gravitate towards that as I grew up. And so I always aspired to try to figure out a way to give back. Ultimately, I got to a point where I felt like running for mayor was the way in which I could do the most good for my community at that given time. And while I wouldn't have thought that that would be the approach that I took earlier on, that's ultimately, like I said, it's where I felt like I could make the most difference, and that's what led to me running. And now I've been in the office for coming up on 3 years, and again, it's all about serving the community. 2021, I'll be running for re-election, and one of the reasons I didn't think I'd ever run for office is because I never liked the politics part of the job. I like the people part of the job, but they go hand in hand, and the politics and the election is a means to an end, the end being doing good. And so it's a small sacrifice to have the privilege of doing this job. So the community will have a chance to tell me at the voting booth whether or not they feel like I deserve another 4 years. But this job has been an honor and a privilege, and I love every minute of it. The current financial challenges we're facing impact everything we do in city government. I take a lot of pride in the fact that over the first 2 years in office, we were able to get the city on a path to fiscal sustainability. And it wasn't until COVID where we were really faced with taking steps back, and we're hopeful that they're short term. But really, regardless of the resources that we have, even with our current constraints, we still have an annual operating budget of around $250 million. That's a lot of money. There's a lot of need, and there's a lot that we do with that money, but it's a lot of money, and so that tells me that we can continue to advance our agenda and to serve our community. We just have to prioritize where that funding goes. And people say a budget is a reflection of your priorities or your values, and so for me and for my team, as we try to do more with less, the old cliche, we need to make sure that we are investing our limited resources in ways that support diversity and inclusion. We have a vision at the City of Syracuse. It's one of the first things that we established when I took office. Our vision is for Syracuse to be a growing city that embraces diversity and creates opportunity for all. And so we need to make sure every time we're making a decision about where we're investing those resources, that it ultimately supports that vision. So in each one of those cases, whether you're looking at the 81 project, Syracuse Surge, the Blueprint 15 opportunity, those are opportunities in and of themselves. 81, we know that the elevated viaduct has come to the end of its useful life. It has to come down. We have a decision about what goes in its place. Syracuse Surge, that is a series of projects and initiatives intended to prepare our community for the jobs in the new economy. And Blueprint 15, again, is an opportunity where the Syracuse Housing Authority is looking at their existing property and trying to determine how and where to invest in it in the future. So each one of those opportunities exist regardless of the focus on diversity and inclusion. What makes them truly transformational opportunities is if we can ensure that each one of them is truly inclusive and gives opportunity to those that historically haven't had access to it. And in the case of 81, to those that not only haven't had access to opportunities, but were negatively impacted by previous investments. We know that when 81 was built, it displaced a lot of people, and they were predominantly Black and brown people. And so the 81, as it stands today, is a literal and figurative scar in our community that has had a ripple effect over the past 50 years. So we have an opportunity now to not only make a new investment, but to try to right some of those historical wrongs that came with that project. And how can we use that opportunity to create new opportunities for the very populations that were marginalized and negatively impacted by the initial project? Similar with Syracuse Surge, we know that there are certain opportunities to create jobs in the new economy. A lot of what's driving that investment is connectivity, and we've invested a lot in our technology infrastructure to support connectivity. But what makes Surge unique, the way we define it is it's our strategy for inclusive growth in the new economy. So any community can make the right investments, establish the right private sector partnerships, and catalyze growth. But it's much more rare and much more difficult, frankly, to make sure that that growth is truly inclusive and that you're being intentional and strategic in where you're investing resources to make sure that, again, those that have not historically and traditionally been a part of economic growth, and specifically in the tech sector, which is where a lot of our focus on Syracuse Surge is, that's what will make Syracuse Surge truly transformational, is if we create opportunities for everyone in our community. And finally, with Blueprint 15, similar to 81, we've seen it play out time and time again in cities all across the country. When a property or when a neighborhood doesn't have a whole lot of economic value, people don't pay much attention to who's living there or who's investing there. But as soon as there's market opportunity, you begin to see that interest in that investment, and that's typically when, similar with what happened with 81, people are displaced. So with Blueprint 15, we have an opportunity to reinvest in a neighborhood that, again, was significantly negatively impacted by the 81 project and other urban renewal projects in the past. How can we use this opportunity to create inclusive growth, to create mixed income housing opportunities? We know that concentrating any one particular demographic in a particular area, whether it's all luxury housing or all low-income housing, doesn't create a vibrant, dynamic community. It's when you have a mix of uses and a mix of incomes that you have true community and true growth. So that's what we're trying to accomplish with Blueprint 15, and there's a lot of work to do, but we think we have the right vision. And again, that's what will take what we have from just a regular opportunity to a transformational opportunity. Yeah, it's a great question, and the reality is I can all the things that I'm saying I believe in and are the right things to say and to do, but it's one thing to say them and it's another thing to actually do them. And so I spent a lot of time reflecting on how we take good intentions and actually put them into practice to create true change. And I think there's a few different steps, and we're learning as we go as a community, because we've started down paths before with the right intentions and ended up with the wrong results. And so how can we make sure that that doesn't happen this time? Well, I think there's a few things that we're trying to do and that we've started to do. Number one is changing who's around the table when decisions are being made. I said throughout the campaign that I wanted to have an administration that reflected the diversity of the community that we serve. And that when you, regardless of the table that you're sitting around, whether you're at the mayor's conference table, you're in a boardroom, you're in a neighborhood meeting, anytime you're in a position to make decisions that impact your community, you have to make sure that those that are part of that decision-making process, again, represent and reflect those that are going to be impacted by those decisions. So for me, that started with building the team in City Hall and making sure that we did have a diverse and inclusive team. And I feel really good about the amount of progress we've made ensuring that that the city administration reflects our community. Then you have to take the next step and to make sure that we're inviting the right people to the table to participate in those decision-making processes with us. An example, we talked about 81. 2 weeks ago, we held what was called our 81 Big Table meeting. That was an idea brought to us by a local community-based organization called the Urban Jobs Task Force. And the idea, again, was what we've just been talking about, bringing together literally a lot of partners at a big table. In our case, because we're in a pandemic, it was a virtual table, but bringing people to the table that haven't historically been there when these decisions are made and haven't historically shared that same space together. So having government in the same room as community activists and community-based organizations. Also having labor unions at the table, different levels of government, neighborhood residents. Getting those people to the table. So again, these decisions aren't made in a vacuum and they take into consideration broad perspectives because again, they're going to impact a lot of people. What I've found in our work, the most difficult thing to do, but ultimately the most important, is it's one thing to bring people around the table. It's another thing to make sure that the changes that you're making aren't just one-offs. And the term that you hear a lot is systemic, right? That's where the real challenge lies. When we talk about systemic racism, that is acknowledging that the systems that we're all operating in are inherently racist. And so how do you make sure that when the people that are at the table today are not at the table tomorrow, that we have the systems in place that will carry forward that focus on diversity and inclusion. And as I go into a re-election year, I've been thinking a lot about what we've accomplished over the past 2.5 years. And what scares me the most is that if you take the people that we've brought to the table away, what's really changed? And so again, as much as we need to focus on getting those people to the table, we need to focus on those underlying systems that are going to create that systemic change no matter who's at the table. We pride ourselves on being a data-driven administration. One of the first things I did after I assembled our team and assembled a vision, we created a performance dashboard where we measure our progress based on specific key results that we identify as important. That is a way, just fundamentally, that's the way in which we go about governing. But I think that similar, I guess, aligned with the conversation that we've had about diversity and inclusion, you have to look at success through a number of different lenses. So what may mean success for me may not mean success for somebody that lives under the shadow of Interstate 81. We believe that long-term removing, well, I believe that removing the elevated viaduct and building what we call the community grid is in the long-term best interests of the community. But for somebody that lives within the shadow of that viaduct, how is the construction project going to impact that person's quality of life? How might bringing cars down to the ground level impact air quality and other things that people might not be dealing with right now? So in each one of those cases, as important as it is to identify the metrics that you want to measure, it's equally as important to look at success through those different lenses of everyone that you serve, of everyone that's at that table, to make sure that there's a common understanding of what success looks like and an acknowledgement that it may mean different things to different people. But ultimately, once you determine what that is, then you have to put in place a way in which you can measure it so you can hold yourself and your partners accountable, but also so the community, those that we're serving, can hold us accountable. Change is really hard for everyone, and what I've found is anytime you do try to create change, there is natural pushback because again, it's something that's not always comfortable for people. One thing that I think is important to help people get more comfortable with the idea of change, oftentimes when we're trying to change things in the community, people are basing their reactions on the status quo. The analogy I like to use is you have a pie, and you divide that pie up into different sections, right? And everyone's fighting for their piece of the pie. And if you change things, or if you try to create other opportunity for other people or stakeholders, well, inherently that means my piece of the pie must be getting smaller, and that's not okay. And so what I try to encourage all of us to think about is, how do we increase that size of that pie? So it's not about what you're losing, it's about what we collectively are gaining. And I think that on the topic of privilege, there historically, when we're talking about systemic racism, historically there are certain populations that have had bigger pieces of that pie, and that are used to change benefiting them. And if they for whatever reason believe that this change might result in something other than that happening, it creates a really difficult moment of self-reflection where you have to look in your mirror and decide whether or not you want to be willing to take a risk, or willing to let some things go for the greater good in a way that may or may not have a negative impact on you. And that's hard, to be selfless. We're all inherently selfish. How do you become selfless? Again, I think it becomes easier when you start talking about changing the paradigm, so we're not all fighting over the same size pie. You have to increase it and create opportunities for everyone to win. And I think that also it's helping people, including people that have benefited from the current systems, help them understand why some of the things that aren't working in the community are a result of that very same system that they've benefited from, whether it's from policing or economic development. But there are, I think, helping people connect those dots between what they see as being a problem, and understanding how the existing systems are contributing to that problem, and how if we want to truly solve them, we can't do so using that same system that created that problem. You have to change the system to do it. But I think that I, as one elected official, with my own bias, with my own privilege, I'm not going to be able to change everybody's mind. We need partners, and that's what we see the 100 as, a really critical partner to, first and foremost, like we're doing today, have these conversations, and to do it in a space that's safe, but that still ultimately holds people accountable for their positions and their roles. But dialogue is a great first step in having these difficult conversations. Putting, again, people that aren't normally at the same table or in the same space together into those spaces to have some of those difficult conversations, to begin to generate some of that empathy that helps you take yourself out of just your own perspective and to better understand the perspective of others, because that will help you better understand how your role in these systems impacts others. So it's really hard, and I wish I could say that I have the quick fix or the easy solution. I don't think any of us do. That's why things haven't changed as much as we'd like. But much as we're doing today, oftentimes it just starts with having a dialogue and learning more about yourself and others. So the specific concept of pretrial services is something that I'd like to make sure that I fully understand, but I think it's part of a broader conversation that we have been having here locally and in New York State about, again, the criminal justice system and how it's set up in a way that disproportionately impacts certain populations, particularly communities of color and poor communities. Getting back to the point that you made about the moment that we're in right now. Again, I've been in my job for a little more than 2.5 years, and I came in with a priority to address some of these systems change issues. Again, from ensuring that our departments are diverse and reflect our community, but specific to police, really addressing systemic change within the police department. And we have made significant progress in doing that, from the process in which we went about selecting our police chief. It was a nationwide search. We went through a year-long community engagement process where we listened to the community, we heard their concerns, and we used that to inform our decision about who we hired. And from the time that we've brought in Chief Buckner, prioritizing the policy changes, updating the use of force policy, looking at how we diversify recruitment. Those were all things that we were working on. Some of them were easier than others. We certainly have faced resistance along the way, both internally and externally. And the way that I've tried to look at the moment that we're in right now, which sadly did come as a result of a man losing his life, being murdered by a police officer in George Floyd, it's an opportunity to accelerate that change. And frankly, it's been a wake-up call for me that just because we're focused on it, just because we are incrementally making change, doesn't mean it's happening fast enough or that we're doing enough. And that's what I've heard loud and clear from many in the community, including people that are literally sitting outside of City Hall right now, is that what we're doing isn't enough, and we're not doing it fast enough. And I think that we all need to look at this moment that we're in and try to come together and understand what else needs to be done and to really prioritize getting it done. So that's what we've tried to do with police reform. And to your point, some of that we can control locally, but there are other levels of government that influence the system. New York State is a significant influencer, and we've seen changes being made at the state level, including with bail reform, that try to accomplish something that is intuitive and it sounds logical, but hasn't been the case in the criminal justice system, which is that your level of income should have no impact on your outcome in the criminal justice system. And starting with the idea behind bail of that depending on how much money you have access to, that can have an impact on your freedom. When you say it out loud, it just doesn't sound right. It doesn't make sense. Yet, how long have we been doing it that way? And so, again, I think that we need to start to dismantle these systems that are in place that set certain people up for failure within those systems. And so, just as we need to make sure that we're not basing someone's individual freedom on whether or not they can post bail, I think, and again, I want to learn more specifically about the programs that you're referencing, but every step of the way, from the time that you engage with law enforcement, thinking about how your individual circumstances might influence that engagement, whether it be your historic experiences with law enforcement, whether it be the privilege that you carry, that from that moment and every moment thereafter, you need to be looking at how our system may be set up in a way to create different outcomes for different people. And then you need to dismantle those systems. So anything that we can do to provide pretrial support and assistance to those that we've said for as long as our system has been in place are innocent until proven guilty, we need to make sure that they have access to all the resources that anyone else would have to make sure that it actually happens in reality and isn't just something we say. The short answer is yes. Yes, I am, absolutely. And just to expand on that a little bit, as I said, I learn in this job and in this life every day, and I welcome the opportunity to further develop and nurture my relationship with the 100, and to learn from the organization and from the individuals involved with the 100, and ultimately, as we've talked about before, to hold myself accountable and to empower others to hold me accountable. And it sounds like that's this MOU will give us the opportunity to hold ourselves accountable at a time when it couldn't be more important. So I welcome the opportunity to engage in that agreement with you, and look forward to continuing the conversation.